Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Modano, and thank you so much for tuning in to the first topic lead of the semester. Hopefully, I do a good job, and I'm a little nervous, but hopefully, you guys will be patient. My presentation is about algebraic thinking, and I'm going to dive into the readings and a couple of articles I found that supplement the idea behind it. So, let's get started. So let's get down to it. Basically, what is algebraic thinking? Basically, if you think about it, it consists of two major things: the ability to build a repertoire of tools, strategies, or skills to tackle a problem that does not have a more or less of a direct approach. It is you gotta create your approach and then attack it that way. And it basically talks about three fundamental ideas when it comes to math: making those generalizations, talk about the language they discuss in the topic, and modeling, creating that strategy. So generalizing is understanding what they're talking about, language, what are the key words they're discussing for like action words, and finally, how are you going to set up this problem to resolve it? And every time I think about algebraic thinking, when they say create a set of tools, it always reminds me of Batman when he has his set of his utility belt, and all of a sudden he has every tool at his disposal when he needs it. So that's every time I think of a Batman, I think of algebraic thinking. And also, whenever you're on social media, if you haven't seen these activities on your page, man, you've been hiding under a rock because they're always showing up on my media. They're trying to confuse people, and for good reason. Algebraic thinking has always been an issue for the population as a whole. And if you want to get traffic to your site, you post these pictures because it sets up arguments, just like PEMDAS would for any kind of a post you want to get started. So this is basically the gist of algebraic thinking. So let us dive into what Sherman talks about when it comes to algebraic thinking. And in this case, chapter 3, the addition of whole numbers. One of the biggest things that Sherman emphasizes in this chapter is the idea that students need to start developing this conceptual understanding of whole numbers because a lot of students like to take the easy way out and just copy what the teacher is doing. And sometimes teachers are at fault because just we want kids to just get it. We want the kids to do well on the test. But we need to understand it goes beyond that. It's more than a monkey see, monkey do situation, but understanding what the topic is about. And this is an excellent opportunity for teachers to dive in to what kind of errors, common errors, students might be diving in, and what are the interventions that you can do to prevent those from happening again. Now, I would like to introduce you to Ian. This is a student that is discussing the topic. This is a sample student, the all star student that we all have as a whole, right? All these, the descriptions for Ian is like the perfect students. He likes to do everything, he likes working with people. Believe it or not, he likes being with next to the teacher. So I was laughing my head off when I was reading this because this is a perfect world situation. But we all know those are not in our classroom. We got IEPs. We have students with ADHD. We have students with language barriers, and this is not. They have nothing in related to relation to Ian, and this is what I think in this chapter lacks some of that depth. Because if we go to a sample problem they're discussing about Ian, they are talking about a word problem, a specific word problem that involves they include a number and include the actual word of a number in this problem. And this hit close to home because in our previous discussion post talking about problem solving, I come from a predominantly Latino community, and language barriers were a thing. So how can we even tackle this problem when students do not understand the content? First of all, in my days back in the 90s, we didn't have things like Google Classroom. We didn't have those tools available to us to make it easier. So we struggled before we could understand what the content was expecting from us. So these are the kind of the things you got to understand before we talk about students like Ian. So if we were to go over some of the error patterns we saw with Ian, The first one that you will notice is renaming add-ins. That was basically students were having issues working the problem how it was written, and they started working on their own side, trying to figure out what's 7 plus 3. What was the issue in this problem was that 7 plus 3 is 10, but the way they're writing the 10 does not go appropriately with the structure, right? Another part of how to solve a problem is the direction that you go with it. That pattern consisted of where did you start solving the problem? The student went from left to right, which we know is not the correct method either. That is another common trend. And the last one, the column addition, same thing. You have three different digits according to the students. So you add that is not a 14, that is a 1 and a 4. So when you add all these digits, they end up being 8. Common mistakes that happened, easy ways to intervene if you find these patterns right away. Now, luckily for us, Sherman does not just come with problems, he also comes with solutions. And one of the biggest one he gives us is do not overwhelm the student, give them one problem at a time, one or two, ease them into the lesson, ease them into the expectations. And not only give them a few problems, but also do what is known as heterogeneous grouping. I personally use this a lot in my classroom because I believe I am not the only teacher. We're all teachers and learners in the class. So, giving that responsibility to each other, making them responsible for their own learning, can have a lot of tremendous effects on their psyche. So, putting students that are from different academic levels together can really help them stay on task. From the student that is behind to the student that finishes early and now is bored, each one has a responsibility to each other to assist from one another. And the last one, again, give them a few problems, but go from simple to more complex gradually. So again, the conceptual understanding of adding whole numbers and the suggestions that Sherman gave us to how to present that lesson goes hand in hand with what we're trying to learn with algebraic thinking. And I found this article by Blanton that discusses how algebraic thinking is being misused in the public education system just because we are not doing it sooner. Algebraic thinking is a topic that is discussed later in the student's life. For example, usually the traditional educational system goes with arithmetic and then algebra. There's a big rift, a big division that is not allowing us to join these two together simultaneously. Which what happens leads to a disproportionate mastery of these tools. Instead of learning them hand by hand, they're learning them one at a time, which should not be the case. So this article discusses how it should be introduced, how algebraic thinking should be introduced in the third grade instead of in middle school. Common Core supports this idea, is also seeking more research and interventions because we know algebraic thinking can be confusing. Interventions can be most effective if used as a formative assessment tool to make sure every student keeps up with the material. So algebraic thinking is not impossible. It is not easy because even for teachers can be daunting, but it is a tool that needs to be taught early on, according to this article. And looking at this quote again, it's from Blanton. They do believe that algebraic thinking has a place in the third grade level and higher, and it is a foundation that also needs to be established instead of how we're doing it now. Because in my classroom, as a high school teacher, I see the effects of not using algebra sooner, and it shows with the students. This is where the idea of the social media posts come to mind. There are already worksheets for students like that. I try to give it a value, give these flowers a value, and add them together. These multiple representations of visuals instead of using variables is a great start to get the kids to think with algebraic methods. So it has a place. It should be taught in elementary because we need to start developing these tools for them. Now, my second article is from Papadopoulos, and it is an article regarding their own approach to teaching algebraic thinking to the third grade students. And they call it the tug of war activity. It's supposed to be an activity that specializes in algebraic thinking, and it's all about how you present it. Because, again, like I said, some teachers do not like teaching these conceptual understanding because it can be so challenging to explain, especially to a young mind like in third grade. I have difficulty explaining this to my high school students as it is. So I am not jealous of your task ahead, elementary teachers. But here's a quote that they discuss in the article. They uh, they tell you the first step, the four basic principles, perspectives. Again, it does involve arithmetic, which is why they go hand in hand. That problem solving we discussed in week 2 is also relevant, but you also need to involve these relationships. There's a relationship in this problem that you need to understand, and looking at the structures involved within these relationships. So it's popping up into the activity, the tug of war activity. Again, it was presented to third grade level students, and the students were able to look at these unknowns, use different symbols with the unknowns, and give it value. And by giving it value, you found those missing quantities through these pictures. So what I'm going to show you right now is what they gave the kids initially. So they gave the kids some visuals. They gave each animal a symbol. Again, this is supposed to be a cat. These are supposed to be two mice or rats, and they are equal to each other. So we know that a cat is equal to two mice. A duck is equal to a cat and a rat. And a dog is equal to a goose and a rat. Notice how the rat is involved in all three scenarios because now it's there's a certain amount that needs to equate to the other one. Now, how can you have an algebraic thinking activity with this? Well, what if you gave another equations with a missing animal and they had to find out what that animal was? For example, if you have a cat and a rat and there's a rat and a dog, what should be the missing piece? What students should be able to understand, you could trade this dog into a for an extra rat and a geese or a goose. And that should open up even many doors to find out what's hidden. What is this hidden animal here? So if students are able to interrelate or mix and match what they have, there will be a great benefit for them to start building these tools for algebraic thinking. And personally, a lot of students, they always ask this question: is when am I ever going to use this in the real world? And specifically with me, where I live in a border town, I immediately mentioned to them, "Oh, we're talking about different types of currency. Hey, we live in America. We use the dollar system, the dollar currency, but across the border, a few miles away, we have the Mexican peso. And sometimes you understand that the value is not the same. A dollar and a peso does not match, and they get that right away because it is within their cultural perspectives, within their schema of thinking." And finally, jumping into my last article for the presentation is the Weddergren article. And they discuss further the design of this presentation. Once again, they're still teaching to elementary students, but their focus is how are you going to present this idea? Because again, presentation is key. And one thing they found out is it is possible, but the only downside is because you're dealing with kids so young, sometimes conceptual algebraic thinking is not ideal for a long-term activity just because again it's so challenging. Some kids can get confused, bored, or distracted, and all of this leads to disruptions. You can only do so much with these kids at an early age, but I mean, let's do something. But we cannot go do it for too long because again, there are limitations as well. What they did in in their activity is when it comes to buying or trading food. If you can see, they have different types of food. Two buns cost four red rods, and then we start adding different color strips. And we talked about food. What do you want? What can you trade instead of buying? Like pretending that we lived in the old ages and there was no money, no currency involved. How would people make trades? What would be the value of each of these strips? And how can you make a fair trade? It is a it is a great activity for leaving loads of discussion where students need to generalize and agree upon what defines an amount worth the trade and how many of each should be traded to guarantee both parties are leaving happy with that transaction. It is a great method for them to understand what is a transaction and how can we create a trade without the money aspect. And finally, we jump into the last section of my presentation, which is my favorite one. I want to talk about a few strategies that I've used in my classroom, where I try to promote algebraic thinking in my through my own pedagogy. The very first thing I start with my kids at the beginning of the year is called the magic octagon. It has no math involved. It's more of a perspective kind of activity where I learned all of this information thanks to the math god himself, Mr. Or Dr. Dan Meyer already. I've been following him for a while since early in my career, and he has really changed the way I teach. I first met him at the first NCTM conference that I went to in San Diego, 2018. And one of the activities that he taught me was about, let's talk about the magic octagon. Whereas we have two lines on both sides of the octagon, but when I rotate it, does the original arrow go the same direction as this one? Supposedly supposed to go clockwise, but when you flip it, it goes the opposite direction. You see? That's how it's supposed to look. But when you rotate it once again, it won't go the same direction. And it's just a quick assignment for them to realize, well, what is supposed to happen and why it doesn't go that way. A great topic of conversation. Why is it not following the same method? And this is where we practice reflections, geometry. Why it's happening that way. Another one that I learned through NCTM, I bought this book and I'm so glad that I did. It's called High Yield Routines. Notice it's called Grades K through 8. I'm a high school teacher, but again, our students are so behind that this is like the appropriate activities for them because they're pretty good. We talked about again more generalizations. What's the difference? Each of these pictures has something different from the others. I get the kids talking about, hey, how are these dogs all different? Some kids might mention size. Some kids might mention this one's longer. This one has dots. This one is facing the opposite direction. These are all valid arguments, and it gets them riled up to the transition to a math related one talking about numbers. So how are these different? Maybe one of them has the pi symbol. Maybe another one has a pi in fraction form. Maybe one of them is not pi at all, but just a 3.14. And this one, 3.1414, is also not pi, but it has a 1 4 going on forever. So these are things that I want to get the kids thinking about, finding those distinctions, looking at the structure. And finally, my last activity is around Desmos. If you guys have never used Desmos before, I recommend it with my heart. Has changed my lesson plans for the better. And this was called turtle crossing, and involves further relationship between two aspects, and trying to find out how they work together. As you can see, the beginning is just a turtle trying to cross the beach, and we're comparing the graph to their movements. And again, students trying to find why the turtle is moving that way when you're comparing it to a graph. So it is a great way for algebraic relationships, and you can even go deeper with activities like this one, where you showing, hey, why is this turtle splitting up? What is this graph showing that might be causing that? And again, so many discussions can happen because of this. And again, you're comparing time and distance, comparing functions. When you put one thing in, you're supposed to get one thing out. It gets the students thinking, and not only thinking, but at the end of this activity, you can even gamify the aspect by having the kids trying to cross the beach without getting bitten by electric eels. Again, another activity for them to follow. They have a graph on the left side, and you want to avoid the eels at all costs. Now, what I love about this activity is it is different. It could be challenging for all kinds of students. For some students that are slow learners, you can just tell them, hey, avoid the eels, get to the other side. While other advanced learners who might finish that faster, you can tell them, hey, I want you to copy the exact movements of the turtle, as see if you can draw the exact graph. And you'll see a little shadow turtle that shows the student's turtle compared to the original. So it keeps everybody engaged for a long period of time, and it keeps people collaborating with each other. So to finish off my presentation, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I do want to talk about a few discussion questions according to what we talked about so far. We've talked about conceptual understandings. We talked about how sometimes we put that in the back burner and work more with procedural things. And I want to ask you, what are some of your experiences in the classroom where you've attempted to reach a more to teach a more complex activity? Did it turn out the way it was supposed to? Why or why not? And another one, a little more serious on the serious side, is hey, we all struggled with remote learning. We all know that students struggled learning, and a lot of students fell behind because of it. I wanted to ask you, we all know the traditional error patterns that happen in our assignments, in our homework, but have you noticed additional error patterns because of COVID? Because we went 2 years in out computer learning. Have any issues, lack of learnings from those years affected your classroom right now? And how could we support? There is an academic void from previous years. What are those voids you've seen so far, if any? And the last one, how often would you feel comfortable teaching algebraic thinking? Like I said, it's not an easy topic, but would you be more comfortable, or would it be draining if you had to teach it consistently through a district approved curriculum? Or would you prefer the freedom of you finding these algebraic thinking lessons and doing them at your own pace? These are both good approaches, but again, what could be more challenging than the other, depending on the prep that you need to do yourself. And these are my resources, and hopefully you guys enjoyed my presentation. Thank you a lot for sticking around. If you have any questions about my personal activities I did, or you want to keep the discussion going, here's my email. You can also go to my website, where I also have some stuff for my kids, or you want to see some of the resources I use. And finally, I do also like to keep a social presence with my kids. If you go on Instagram with my hashtag MathWithMo, you can find more things that I do with them, and also keep track of, stay active with their activities. That's it for this, everybody. Thank you for sticking around, and looking forward to your presentation. Have a good night.